Hello, and welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I'm your host, Dr. B. We are currently in week four. Is it week four already? Week three. I think it's week three. We are in week three of our Principles of Macroeconomics course. And this week, we're going to be discussing Chapter 4, which is the market forces of supply and demand. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Since we're in week 3 of our course, by now you should have completed homeworks 2 and 3, which were due this past Sunday night. If you have not done so already, please make sure that you submit those as soon as possible. This week will be a discussion board on Chapter 4. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. The market forces of supply and demand. This is really the fundamentals of all things economics, supply and demand. The idea of supply is that products or goods, in most cases products, are available for sale at a specific quantity at a specific price. That's supply. Okay, supply. Demand is the demand for goods or services available in the open marketplace. So there are a couple of things that influence supply and demand. And a lot of it has to do with the consumers of those goods and services. And those consumers have effects on what is being supplied in the marketplace and what the demand is. There are a lot of things that influence things like consumers, such as changes in taste and obsolete products, supply chain restraints. And so all of these things impact supply and demand. So let's break down each individual component of supply and demand by first discussing the marketplace. The marketplace, the best way to think about a marketplace is where buyers and sellers come together and they exchange goods and services for monetary gain, for cash. Okay. An example of a marketplace would be you go to the shopping mall and you have a lot of different vendors. And sometimes those different vendors sell the same product at different prices. That's a market. That's a market. Okay. And you're the buyer. The buyer is the person who demands the product. You have a need for the product. You're the buyer. And the seller, those are the retailers, right? They sell the product that you have a demand for. That is what makes up a marketplace. There are a lot of different types of marketplaces. In macroeconomics, we discuss economics from the higher level, if you will, the national level. And when we discuss the national level of economics, it's important to understand that there are different types of nations that have different types of markets. And there are certain instances where markets, there's multiple different markets within the same country. Here in the United States, we have a couple of different types of markets. We have perfect competition, oligopoly, monopoly, and competitive. So let's discuss all of those. The first one to better understand is competitive. A competitive market means that there's many buyers and sellers selling the same product at different price points, but very similar in price, right? An example of a competitive market in the United States would be, let's think here. would be something like gasoline stores, where you purchase the gasoline from, the gas stations, right? Let's say you have 4 gas stations on a street corner, and all 4 gas stations are within like a penny or two of each other, right? In terms of price point per gallon. That's a competitive marketplace. Many buyers and sellers around the same price for the same product. That's a competitive market. A perfectly competitive market is where all goods are exactly the same exact product, same exact quality of that product. And the buyers and sellers there's so many of them that not one of them can affect market price. Okay. So it makes a perfectly competitive market. Same quality, same product, and the price is very similar. And there's a lot of people that want that product. That's perfectly competitive. So our gas station example would be pretty good for a competitive market, because you have multiple sellers, the same product, and you have multiple buyers. So that would be perfectly competitive in that type of situation. So what are the types of things that impact demand? Demand, as we had stated, is the individual consumer's desire desires to purchase the same product. A lot of people want the same product. That's demand, okay? And the quantity demanded is the amount of that product that buyers are willing to buy at a specific price. That's the quantity demanded, okay? An example. Let's say you go to the grocery store and you want oranges. And you go to the grocery store to buy 4 oranges specifically, okay, for the week. And you're willing to buy those 4 oranges at 25 cents a piece. So 25 cents an orange, you got 4 oranges, that's $1. You're willing and able to buy it for $1. But if the price of oranges goes up to 50 cents a piece, you might not be as willing to buy the 4 oranges. Okay, you might only buy 2 because the price point went up. That's kind of the law of demand. So when all things are equal, if the price of the good goes up, the quantity of demand goes down. So in the example of oranges, there's 4 oranges that you normally buy in a week. The normal price for oranges is 25 cents an orange. So you spend $1 for 4 oranges. If the price per orange goes up to 50 cents per orange, you might only want to buy 2 because the price has gone up. So therefore, the price goes up, the demand comes down. All right. And the opposite is also true. If the price goes down, the demand goes up. So for example, let's say the price of oranges goes down to, we'll say 20 cents an orange, okay? From 25 cents down to 20 cents. It goes down to 20 cents per orange. Now, you might be willing to buy 5 oranges, whereas before you would buy 4. Or if the price was higher, you'd only buy 2. You see how that works? You go from 2 oranges to 4 oranges to 5 oranges, along with the price coming down, right? Price goes up, you want to buy less. If the price goes down, you want to buy more. That's the law of supply, that's the law of demand. Okay. Here's another example. I don't know what a late is, but here's another example, okay? Let's say a late could be, I don't know, lettuce. Let's say it's lettuce. I think that's probably what it is, lettuce. I had a lettuce, okay? So let's say you want to buy lettuce Now this is called a demand schedule. As we see the price rising from top down, right, on the left side, the quantity demanded falls. The more expensive something is, the less people want of it. That's the law of demand. Okay, so in looking at this demand schedule, we can see where there's optimums, right? Free. Of course, I want 16 of them. $1.14, $2.12, $3.10, $4.08, $5.06, $6.04. And we could see how that could be spread out even further, right? So that demand schedule can be graphed, and we see the graphical representation. The demand falls as the price rises. Demand falls, demand of quantity falls as the price rises. And that's what this graphical representation shows us. Now, it's also important to note that demand, as it's graphed, is typically always downward sloping to the right. We see it starts here at the top as the price is high and comes down as the price goes down. And this represents, and that's of course over quantity, and that represents that the higher price point, lower quantity, lower price point, higher quantity, downward sloping and to the right. The demand curve typically always follows that line, downward to the right. That's demand. So what is the market of demand? This represents all of the individual people added together. What is their total demand for a good or a service? That's what we call market demand. And the market demand it can be represented on a curve. It's where it's a horizontal curve. And this is used to find the quantity demand at any price. And we add the individual quantities. So let's take a look at the market demand. So quantity demand is represented by QD. That's anytime you see Q, it's quantity. Okay. In economics, it's Q, it represents quantity. The small d means demand. So quantity demanded. And we see the price points. So here are two competitors for lettuce. We have Sam's and we have Dean's. And we can see already that Sam's looks like almost like a bulk supplier, bulk seller, or they buy in bulk, right? We can see that it's very quantity is very high at the lower price points and very low at the higher price points. Whereas Dean's, it looks like they buy a little bit less. So the market demand. The market demand is, again, the sum of all individuals' demand. That's called market demand. And all it simply means is we add up the quantity demanded at each given price point. That is what is the market demand at each price. And again, the demand curve is always downward sloping and to the right. Downward sloping and to the right is the demand curve. So we can graph the market demand as we've done here, and we see that the market demand follows a very similar trend line that the two individual competitors follow. So now that we understand how to graphically represent the demand, let's take a look at the demand curve. And it shows how prices affects quantity demanded over time. There are a couple of things that influence demand that may not be price related. We call these non-price determinants. And so these changes cause shifts in demand. If there are more buyers of a particular product, there's an increase in the quantity of demand at each point, which makes sense. If more people want it, so therefore there should be more supply or more demand. More people want it, there's more demand. And there's a shift in the demand curve to the right. And if there are less people demanding this product, there'll be a shift to the left. So looking at our example, okay, for lettuce, we got our downward sloping to the right, and this is the market demand, right? If we have 5 more buyers on the market, there will be a shift in the demand curve to the right because there's more buyers. The opposite is also true. If there's less, the shift will be to the left. Now, what are the other factors in the shift in demand? Well, income is one of them. The more money you earn, the more you're willing to buy of a product. That makes perfect sense, right? There are normal goods that you would normally buy, and those normal goods would increase with the more income that you have. Another impact is the quality of goods. If the quality of goods is lower or the same, there might be an increase in that demand or a decrease. The more you make, the higher quality products you would typically buy. And that's very common among things. You might spend a little bit more money if you're making more money for a higher quality product. That's what this tells us. And the inferior product, the one of lower quality, we would see a demand shift to the left. It would decrease. So one thing to remember is a demand curve shift to the right means an increase in buyers. Demand curve shift to the left means a decrease in buyers. And there are things like the quality of goods and services, the income of individuals buying those goods and services. Those things impact the overall demand for each product. Now, what about the price of related goods? Related goods are called substitutes, okay? Related goods are called substitutes. It's like saying, I would rather have pizza than hamburgers, or I would rather have hamburgers than pizza. Okay, those are substitutes. They don't complement each other, but they can be a substitute for each other. So 2 goods can be considered a substitute if there's an increase in the price that leads to an increase in the demand for the other. So for example, if the price of a piece of pizza rises, the demand for hamburgers will rise because hamburgers cost less, right? And the opposite is also true. If the price of hamburgers rises, there'll be a higher demand for pizza. So we see that the intrinsic shift in the demand curve for pizza and hamburgers will change based off of which substitute has the lower price point. Another example would be Coke versus Pepsi, laptops versus tablets, CDs versus music downloads. When one price of the other rises, there will be a shift to the other. That's all that means. So that's substitute goods. What about complementary goods? Complementary goods means we have 2 products that complement each other. Okay, they work well together. For example, if there is an increase in demand for hot dogs and hamburgers, there will be an increase in demand for ketchup and mustard and relish. Those are complementary products. Yeah, they complement each other. So complementary products, if there's an increase in the price of one, it leads to a decrease of demand in the other. We know this. If there's two goods. For example, computers require software. Software is the complementary product to a computer. If the price of a computer rises, fewer people will want to buy that computer. And therefore, they will buy less software. If you can't buy the computer, you're not going to buy the software, right? And so therefore, there will be a shift to the left for software. Other examples would be things like college tuition and textbooks. If less people are going to college, there will be less demand for textbooks. Bagels and cream. If there's less demand for bagels, there will be less demand for cream. Eggs and bacon. If there are less people buying eggs, there might be less people buying bacon. Complementary, right? It means they shift in the same direction. Complementary. Consumer tastes. Consumer tastes will also impact the demand curve. Okay, they'll cause shifts in the demand curve. Sometimes consumer tastes change based off of changes in the environment, changes in consumer preferences, changes in consumer behavior, or other external factors. Tastes would represent anything that causes a shift toward a good, will increase the demand for that good and shifts the demand curve to the right. So in other words, if more individuals change their taste toward a product, that product demand increases. Oh, my favorite example, more recently, right? Let's think of Krispy Kreme donuts. Okay, some time ago, there was a shift in the demand curve to the left for Krispy Kreme donuts, meaning the demand went down. Why did that happen? Well, there was a shift in consumer behavior toward more healthier options. So the demand for Krispy Kreme donuts went down. Now, here we are 10 years later, the health trends have shifted once again in the consumer behavior, and the taste for Krispy Kreme donuts is coming back. And so now there's a shift in the demand for Krispy Kreme donuts to the right. And we see those types of trends all the time. So consumer taste change over time. That's very normal. Expectations about the future. Is another factor for change in the demand curve. If you expect your income to increase in the future, there will be an increase in your current demand. In other words, you think you're going to get a promotion, therefore you might start to purchase more expensive things now instead of later. Or if you expect higher prices, there will be an increase in the current demand. One example is if you expect your income to rise, your demand for more expensive meals at restaurants may also increase. Makes sense. People like to eat better when they're making more money. So in summary, there are shifts in the demand curve when there are changes in individuals' incomes, prices of related goods change, consumer taste change, future expectations change, and the number of buyers change. All of those things will ultimately shift the demand curve either to the left or to the right. And of course, the price of the product itself will change, will represent a shift along the demand curve. If price goes up, people buy less. Price goes down, people buy more. So those are all representative of the demand curve. Now, looking at the demand curve in this example for music downloads, okay, of course your textbook's a little older, right? Mid 20 era, right? Mid 2000 era. So, we used to have a lot of CDs before music downloads, right? We had CDs, DVDs. Before that, we had the cassette player. Before that, we had the 8-track. Before that, we had vinyl. These were ways we listened to music over the years. Now, fast forward to 2020, 2021, almost everything's digital, right? It's I haven't bought a new CD in a couple of years at least, right? And I'm sure the same is said for a lot of you who purchase music. And so we see that that is a shift in consumer behavior, right? We shifted away from CDs into digital downloads. So what happened there, right, is we had a shift in consumer changes, consumer taste. And so when that happened, the price for iPods fell. I don't even know if I'm sure they still make them, but now it's you use your phone or your computer, your tablet, your whatever to then download music. The price of music downloads goes down because there's a lot more people downloading music. And the price of music CDs went down because there was a shift in the demand. So as the price of music downloads decreases, we see that the demand and the quantity increases, right? P1 represents price point 1. Q1 represents quantity at that point at 1. Now, as we saw the price of music downloads came down, therefore there will be more individuals buying, and that was a result of a fall in the price of iPods to download the music too. Well, these days it's your phone, not necessarily an iPod. And so that that represents that shift in demand. Now, as the price of music downloads decreases, P1 to P2, we see that there are more downloads, which makes sense. If it used to cost $2 to download one song, and that price fell to $1 per song, you're going to download more songs, right? That makes perfect sense. So a shift from P1 to P2 and a shift of Q1 to Q2. So downward to the right. Price of music downloads decreased. Okay, this one is CDs. This is for CDs. Music CDs and downloads are substitutes. We know this. If you didn't buy a CD, you downloaded the music. That was how it worked. This has nothing to do with streaming. Streaming is way different, okay? So don't get confused with streaming. So you had your CD. You used to have your CD player. Now then you have a download under your computer, right? So what happened to CDs? Well, a lot less people stop buying CDs, right? A fall in the price of CD shifts demand for music downloads to the left. Okay, so if there's less people buying the CD, there's going to be a demand shift to the left. And we also see a shift in the quantity. Less people buying that goes from Q1 to Q2, even at the same price point. Price point didn't change for the CD. So about the quantity. So we talked about demand, which is one part of the equation. We talked about shifts in demand, impacts of demand. We talked about how the demand curve shifts. We also mapped out how the demand curve works. Now let's talk about supply, because in economics, there are two key things to be aware of. You have supply and you have demand. We talked about demand. Now let's talk about supply. Supply is quantity, the quantity of a good or service by sellers willing and able to sell at a specific time at a specific price. That is quantity supply. The law of supply tells us that when all things are equal, the price of a good rises and the quantity of the good rises. Okay, we see they both rise. Price goes up, we provide more on the market. When the price goes down, we reduce the amount of inventory on the market. So looking at the lettuce, okay, I'm not going to produce lettuce for zero. Well, lattes. Okay. Looking at Starbucks lattes. Coffee, yeah? For those of you who drink coffee. If the price of a latte is zero, Starbucks ain't going to sell nothing for zero, okay? I'll only make 3 at $1. I'll make 6 at $2, 9 at $3, 12 at $4, 15 at $5, 18 at $6. The point here is that the quantity increases as the price increases. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, why is that? A lot of retailers, especially Starbucks and everyone else, increases the quantity as the price goes up in an effort to meet demand at the higher prices. What that also does is it provides them with, as you might expect, some additional revenue. So lattes, right? We see how the supply curve is upward sloping and to the right. We know that the demand curve is downward sloping and to the right. Supply curve is upward sloping and to the right. Okay. So market supply, very similar to market demand. Market supply is the sum of all suppliers selling goods and services. Market supply is the sum of the individual suppliers, or represented horizontally, and we can find it at any price. So let's take a look. Starbucks competes with Peet's Coffee. Peet's Coffee is on the West Coast, for those of you who are familiar with Peet's, and the rest of the world, we have Starbucks. So the market represents the sum of all the sellers, right? So it's 0, 3 and 2 is 5, 6 to 4 is 10, so forth and so on. We see that the market value represents all of the sellers. And graphing that, we see the upward slope and to the right, which is the typical slope of supply. Okay. Supply curve shows how prices are affected by affects the quantity supplied. There are other things. We call these non-price determinants. These are things that impact supply, not based off of price. So many things impact the supply. Input prices. For those of you who have me for accounting, you've probably heard me talk about the cost associated with a product. Costs represent all of the costs to make up a product cost. That would be things like direct materials, direct wages, and factory overhead. Those three things together equal the total cost of a product. We call these costs input cost. Direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. Those three things are inputs to make up the total cost of a product. And as the input costs change, we see a shift in the supply. If my cost of labor rises, I will make less. If my cost of materials goes down, I will make more. Okay? And so all of these changes also have an impact on the company's profitability for that product. We always say if the cost comes down and the sale price remains the same, then we will make more profit. And so that's one of the many impacts on the supply side. So suppose there's the price of milk comes down. Okay, milk is a ingredient for a latte, right? And price of milk comes down. Therefore, the total cost of a latte will come down. I'm not going to change my sales price. I'm still going to make because I want to make more profit. But we see the shift in the quantity demand. And so with that quantity demand shift, the quantity of the latte supplied will increase by 5. Technology. Okay, technology, as technology improves over time, we would anticipate that the supply will increase. For example, if I have a bunch of machines that are manufacturing a product for sale, those machines are replacing individuals that would normally do those processes. That will be a cost savings to the company, right? And so with the cost savings to the company based off of technological improvements, we'll see a shift in the demand curve to the right. I'll be able to manufacture more at better quality at a lower cost. Yeah. That's technology. Number of sellers. If there are more individual retailers on the marketplace selling the same product, okay, there will be an increase in the quantity supplied. There's more of a product when there's more people supplying the same product. That makes sense. And that will cause a shift in the demand curve to the right. Of course, the opposite's always also true, right? Future expectations. If there is another dispute in the Middle East, we would expect oil prices to go up. If oil fields in Texas run dry, we would expect the price of oil to go up. This would be shifts to the left. Okay, there's less supply when these events happen. That also means prices will be higher. Suppliers may adjust the supply for future expectations if a good is not perishable. What does this mean? So let's say we have a pandemic that shows up, all right? So what happens when a pandemic shows up? We change future expectations. For example, during a normal pandemic, if there is such a thing, we will build less houses because we expect people not to move around. That is a future expectation. By the way, that did not happen this time around, which is that's what caused the prices of houses on the market to increase substantially, because there is the same or less supply of houses, and the demand was also high. So it caused the prices to increase. So, in summary, if the price changes, there will be a change along the supply curve. Input prices, technology, expectations, number of sellers, all of these things will shift the supply curve either to the left or to the right. Here's a nice example. Supply curve shift. What happens in these following scenarios? If a retailer cuts the price of software for tax accounting, okay, we would see a shift to the right of supply. There will be more supply and also more purchasing. If there is a technological advance in the software to produce at a lower cost, there will be a shift to the right. If there are professional tax return preparers raise the price of the services they provide, there will be a shift to the left. Most people don't want to pay more. Shift one. Shift two. And the preparer, it's usually shift to the left. Now that we talked about both supply and demand, let's talk about this thing called equilibrium. Equilibrium simply means it is where both supply and demand are equal. Supply and demand are equal. It's where the supply curve and the demand curve meet, right in the middle. Equilibrium. It's where demand equals supply. Equilibrium. And our earlier example of the lattes, which I called lettuce for a while, doesn't matter. It's a product is a product, right? $3 price point, I will sell 15 lattes. That is the point of equilibrium. Demand equals supply. If it, and we'll talk about over and under. So equilibrium is where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. Makes perfect sense. The equilibrium quantity is where the quantity supplied and demand are at the equilibrium price. All right, let's take a look at, I'm going to get through you two more terms. One's called a surplus, and the other one is called a shortage. The surplus is where there's more quantity than there is demand. There's more product on the market than what we need or what we want. That is a surplus. For example, I'll have a surplus of lattes at $5 per latte. I'll have more on the market than people actually want, because who wants to pay $5 for a latte? I'd rather pay $3, right? So anything above the point of equilibrium, anything above the point of equilibrium is called a surplus. So we see at $3 I will sell 15 lattes. At $5, I will sell 9 lattes. But I will have 25 lattes available on the marketplace at $5. So the points in between the demand and the supply at that price point is what we call a surplus. This is a result of 16 additional lattes. Where did I get 16, you might be asking? You take the quantity supplied minus the quantity demanded at that price. And that will give you the surplus amount, in this case, 16. What happens when we have a surplus and the markets are not in equilibrium, which they almost never are? Okay. Equilibrium simply means where demand equals supply. That's what we call a perfect world. That means everything is perfect. Demand equals supply, perfect. That's where you really want to be. But that is an imaginary thing. Supply and demand are almost never equal. Almost never equal. I'm sure there's some instances where they are, but for the most part, they're not. So we call these not in equilibrium. When it's not in equilibrium, we face a surplus. Sellers try to increase their sales by cutting prices. Causing the quantity demanded to rise. So if you have too much inventory on hand and you can't sell enough of it, what you should do is increase your sales by cutting the sales price. So instead of charging customers $5 per latte, I'll charge them $4 per latte. I'll put it on sale, as they say. And what that will do is it will cause ultimately an increase in the quantity demanded. People want to buy more when the price is lower. Makes perfect sense, right? And of course, that will also means that I'll have less supply, which reduces the surplus. As the price falls, the market will reach the point of equilibrium. What about when there's a shortage? A shortage simply means that we have less quantity available than there is demand, which is very representative of the housing market today. What if I sold a latte for $1? Well, my demand will be crazy high. Well, everyone will want my lattes. 21 people will want a latte at $1. But I only have 5 lattes available to sell at $1. This results in a shortage of 16 lattes, right? That's kind of a problem, a big problem. Facing a shortage, the sellers raise the price. If you don't have enough to sell, jack the price up because it'll cause demand to go down, right? Less people will buy when the prices are higher. So if less people are buying, that also means I'll be able to raise the supply, which reduces the shortage. And of course, ideally, I want to reach the point of equilibrium. So now that we understand demand and we understand supply and we understand equilibrium, let's take a look at how do we better understand equilibrium and the changes to equilibrium. Well, there's a couple of steps of figuring that out. First step is let's figure out whether the event in the shift of the supply or demand curve exist. If there's a shift in supply or if there's a shift in demand or both in some cases. So let's see if that shift happened, right? That's step one. Step two, let's figure out if the curve shifts to the right or to the left. So we know if demand shifts to the right, that means there's higher demand. If demand shifts to the left, that means there's lower demand. On the supply side, if there's a shift to the left, we have less supply, shift to the right, more supply. Okay. So that's the second step. Let's figure out the shift direction. The third step is let's use the supply and demand diagram to compare where the original equilibrium point was and the new equilibrium point. And what is the change or the effect on the price and the quantity? Well, this is a good one. Hybrid cars. Hybrid car is a car that runs on both gasoline and electric, or gasoline and water, or, hybrid. So there's a demand and there's a supply for hybrid cars. The point of equilibrium is where demand and supply are equal. That's what equilibrium means. So at price point 1 and quantity 1, that's where our point of equilibrium is. There is a shift in demand for hybrid cars because there is an increase in the price of gas. Increase in the price of gas means people will either drive less or they'll purchase a vehicle that is more fuel efficient, in this case, a hybrid car. So what happens is that the demand for hybrid cars increase if there is an increase in the price of gas. And so what that shift represents is a higher demand for hybrid cars. So shift to the right, step 2. Step 3 is identify the new point of equilibrium. Price 2 at quantity 2. So what's the difference between a shift and a movement along the demand and supply curve? Along the supply curve, there's a shift when a non-price determinant of supply changes, like quantity or technology or cost. There is a change in the quantity supplied, which is a movement along the supply curve. This occurs when there's a change in price. For demand, there's a shift in the demand curve when there's a change in the demand, non-price related. A change in the quantity demanded occurs when there's a change in the price. What happens when there's a shift in supply? Let's say a new technology comes out and reduces the cost of producing hybrid cars. First, we identify the current point of equilibrium, P1 at Q1, for the demand and the supply. There will be a shift in the supply curve to the right because we're able to produce more hybrid cars at a lower cost. And of course, this means there'll be a new point of equilibrium. We have a lower price point and a greater quantity from this change. What happens when there's a shift in both supply and demand? Let's say the price of gas goes up and a new technology reduces the cost of hybrid cars. Both curves will shift to the right. Greater demand, greater supply. And we also see that the price point changes as well. Yeah, we just talked about that. Oh, one was increase in cost, the other one was decrease. So of course the opposite is true. So when there's shifts in supply and demand, we'll use the three-step method to analyze the effect. Let's see. So going back to our earlier example of music downloads, if there's a fall in the price of music CDs, there's going to be a shift in the supply and demand. If there is, our sellers of music downloads negotiate the reduction of royalties, meaning there will be lower costs associated with the downloads, there will be an increase in the demand for downloads. And event C is when both A and B occurs. So let's take a look at the CDs. If the price of CDs falls, there will be lower quantity and a lower demand. If there's a fall in the cost of music royalties, the music downloads supply will increase, and we see the increase in demand. And both curves will shift in the event of both happening simultaneously. So we think of market activity in terms of individual markets, right? In a market economy, the price adjusts to balance supply and demand. A way of thinking about that, if I want to increase the demand for my product, I might lower the price to increase the demand for that product. Or if there's too much demand, I will increase the price for my product to lower demand. And I can do the same thing with supply, right? If I have too much supply on hand, I will decrease the price to sell more. If I don't have enough, I'll increase the price to get customers to not buy as much. Equilibrium prices are signals to help us make decisions. So as a manager, you might be faced with a decision to increase or decrease a price of a product that your company sells. That decision should be based off of supply and demand. If you have a lot of demand and not enough of the supply, increase the price. If you have a lot of supply and not enough demand, decrease the price. And the opposite is also true. But the idea is we want to be at the point of equilibrium. So in summation, we use the concept of supply and demand to make a lot of decisions, especially to analyze competitive markets. We use supply and demand curves to quantify and represent supply and demand graphically. We also help us to better understand supply and demand through that perspective, and how we also show the change in quantity and price point based off of the change in equilibrium when there are shifts. And so that, my friends, is the conclusion of Chapter 4, Supply and Demand. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to email me, call me, set up office hours with me. I'm here for you 100% of the time. I do sincerely appreciate all of your time. Thank you so very much.